When we picture the Talmud, we might think of this, well, ancient, dusty book, just filled with obscure laws. But what if we looked at it in a different way? What if we saw it as a record of a really radical intellectual project? A 2,000-year-old attempt to answer one of the most fundamental questions we all have.
I mean, it's a question we all face, right? How do we make sense of this messy, complicated world we live in? How do we build a life that actually has meaning from just the raw material of existence? Well, for the ancient rabbis, the answer was a kind of radical act of intellectual engineering.
That's it. And in so many ways, the entire Talmudic project is an exercise in doing just that, making distinctions. It's all about creating a world of meaning by drawing these careful, precise, and sometimes pretty surprising lines between things. What's pure and what's impure, what's sacred and what's profane, what makes someone a child versus an adult. So in this explainer, we're going to dive into this art of distinction. We'll look at how this whole idea plays out with physical purity, how it defines a person's legal status, and even how it carves up sacred time itself. And then finally, we'll see what it all tells us about this pretty unique way of thinking.
Okay, so let's start by unpacking this intellectual toolkit. This isn't just about a list of rules. It's about the very logic that they use to construct a coherent world. So let's see this toolkit in action with our first and most tangible example. We're diving into a debate about ritual purity, and believe it or not, it all centers on a specific kind of weak, homemade wine. This beverage is called temed. It's basically what you get when you add water to the leftover skins and pulp after you've already pressed grapes for real wine. Now the rabbis have a problem. If this temed becomes ritually impure, can you purify it?
So here is the crucial point. The sages draw a line right here. They say if you made the temed with pure water that later became impure, sure, you can fix it. But if you made it with water that was already impure from the get-go, nope, you can't. So the question is, why? What is the logic behind drawing this particular line? Well, the first theory is based on a really simple physical observation. The rabbis kind of assume that the heavy, impure water sinks to the bottom, while the grape pulp floats on top, and that creates a barrier. This barrier then prevents the purifying waters of a ritual bath from actually making contact with the impure water down below. But hang on a minute, if that's true, shouldn't it apply to both cases? And this is just a brilliant illustration of the Talmudic process. That initial distinction gets challenged, and a whole new understanding emerges. The original theory was actually wrong. In reality, the water and the grape residue are all mixed together. And that means the purifying water can reach everything. The debate itself forced them to refine the line they were drawing, grounding it in a much better understanding of the physical world. Okay, so now let's see how this same logic gets used when the stakes get a lot higher. We're moving from a physical boundary in a jug of wine to the really complex legal lines drawn across a person's lifetime. Rabbi Meir offers a very clean, very sharp principle. He argues that for a young woman, the period where her father can sell her into servitude and the period where he can receive a fine if she's violated are mutually exclusive. They are two distinct boxes, and you can only be in one at a time. It's a perfect, clear line. Now, what's really fascinating here is how this timeline maps out the debate. For Rabbi Meir, the line is puberty, which they marked by the growing of 2 pubic hairs. Before that, sale is possible. After that, a fine is possible. Simple. But the other rabbis disagree. They argue that the eligibility for a fine begins way earlier, at age 3, and that creates this long period where both categories could actually apply at the same time. So the whole debate really boils down to this. Are the boundaries absolute, or can they overlap? Rabbi Meir, he wants a world of clear, distinct categories. The other rabbis, they see a world where legal statuses can coexist, where the lines are, a bit blurrier. It's a fundamental disagreement about how to structure social reality. And this isn't just a one-off argument. This exact same logical pattern pops up again when they debate a minor's right to annul a marriage versus an adult widow's ritual obligations. And again, Rabbi Meir draws a sharp, clean line at puberty, while others see a much more gradual transition. Okay, so we've seen lines drawn in physical substances and in human lifetimes. Now we're going to the most abstract level, drawing lines within time itself, specifically between different degrees of holiness. So look at these 2 scenarios. When a festival, which has a lower level of holiness, leads into Shabbat, which has a higher level, you sound the shofar to mark the transition. But when Shabbat ends and a festival begins, a move from greater to lesser holiness, you recite a special prayer called Havdala.
The ritual you perform depends entirely on the direction of the transition in holiness.
But it gets even more precise. To mark that move from a festival to Shabbat, they debate the exact technique for blowing the shofar. Should the short staccato blast be embedded inside the long blast, or should they be separate but done in a single breath? I mean, this shows an incredible focus on getting the boundary marker just right, down to the level of a single breath.
And the same precision applies to words. When you're reciting the Havdala prayer to distinguish Shabbat from a festival, what's the right formula? Is it enough to say you're separating sacred and sacred? Or, as Rabbi Dosa insists, do you have to be more specific and say you are separating greater sanctity and lesser sanctity? The goal here is perfect definitional clarity. So, what have we seen? Across these very different examples, impure wine, legal status, and sacred time, we've uncovered this incredibly consistent intellectual method at work.
And here's the crucial point. The Talmudic method is all about building a meaningful world by drawing lines. It uses debate not to create conflict, but as a tool to sharpen those lines, to test them, and to make them as precise as they can possibly be. Whether it's the physical, social, or spiritual realm, the underlying belief is that order and meaning come from these careful, rigorous, and clear distinctions. And you know, this ancient project leaves us with a very modern question. We may not be debating ritual purity or shofar blasts, but we all draw lines to make sense of our world. Lines between work and life, between a friend and an acquaintance, between what's right and what's wrong. So the question is, how clear are our own lines? And how do they help us create order out of the chaos?